Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am so thrilled you're tuning in because we're about to deconstruct a really fascinating story. We're going to look at how one person's seemingly restrictive childhood limitation didn't hold them back at all. Instead, it actually became the architectural blueprint for a massive, highly effective cognitive framework. It's a complete journey from constraint to creation, and it's all mapped out in the source material we're analyzing today. Let's dive in. So, life is not designed. It begins with signals. This provocative thesis comes directly from the author Lin Yan, and it absolutely sets the stage for our entire exploration. It challenges how we usually think, right? We like to believe we just sit down and design our lives from scratch. But Yan suggests that what we often perceive as roadblocks, accidents, or forced paths are actually our earliest directional signals. They're literally telling us where to go before we even know how to walk the path.
Here's a quick look at our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover 1. Life begins with signals. 2. The environmental constraint. 3. A dual-track education. 4. Language as a system layer. 5. Time as an amplifier. And finally, 6. The Yan systems model.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1. Life begins with signals, moving from uncontrollable events to directional stability. Think about it. When you're a kid, you don't pick your surroundings. Those early environmental signals are completely out of your control. And yet, these seemingly random events have this profound structural impact on where we end up in the world. They provide the initial coordinates for our life's trajectory, effectively shifting us from a completely unplanned event into genuine directional stability.
Moving to Section 2, let's look at the specific environmental constraint that kicked all of this off: Singapore in the 1970s. So, let's set the scene. The educational landscape was going through a massive shift. Back then, most families, including Yan's, viewed English as the absolute language of opportunity. But because of a severe shortage of school slots, Yan was forced into a Chinese medium school. This wasn't a choice, it was a pure, undeniable constraint. But ironically, being completely shut out of the so-called language of opportunity became the foundational advantage for his entire life's philosophy.
You might think a massive constraint like that would just stop a person's development cold. But actually, no. It acted as a highly precise directional guide. It took the intense pressure of having limited options and channeled it, effectively splitting the author's development into a totally unique educational pathway. The constraint literally became the guidance system itself.
Which brings us to Section 3, a dual-track education, bridging perception and logic.
Because of that forced placement, this extraordinary juxtaposition developed inside the author's mind. The Chinese track was heavily focused on the humanities. We're talking literature, history, geography. It built up this high-density perception, giving the author the cultural depth and philosophical chops needed to truly observe and understand the world. On the flip side, the English track, focused entirely on math and science, installed the engineering logic, the structural thinking, and the analytical rigor required to actually operate within that world.
There's this quote from the text that I absolutely love. The right brain discovers light, the left brain builds the lighthouse. It perfectly captures this non-standard rhythm of learning. The author's cognition wasn't just about linear, rote memorization. The Chinese track, the right brain, was out there exploring, imagining, discovering the light. Meanwhile, the English tracks, the left brain, was busy figuring out the structural mechanics to build the lighthouse. Imagination and integration were just completely outpacing traditional study habits.
Okay, Section 4, language as a system layer, diving into the cognitive management system.
When you break it down, the roles of these two languages become hyper-specialized. Chinese carries incredible information density and philosophy, basically acting as the ultimate signal collector for rapid cognitive alignment. English provides the structure and social adaptation, serving as the heavy-duty system transmitter for global integration. When you fuse them together, they form a complete, incredibly robust cognitive management system.
It's literally like an equation for navigating life. The language layer equals efficiency multiplied by adaptation. The efficiency comes directly from the high density of Chinese and that fast cognitive calibration. The adaptation comes from the structural logic of English and its ability to handle social constraints. It is a powerful multiplier effect where perception perfectly meets execution.
Let's hit Section 5, time as an amplifier, moving from a short-term constraint to a long-term foundation.
Here is the fundamental formula driving all of this. Direction equals signal multiplied by constraint multiplied by time. What might have seemed slow, forced, or just plain inefficient in the short term was actually quietly building this unbreakable foundation. It took that initial childhood constraint and, over decades, amplified it into a highly successful 40-year engineering career.
When you look at this trajectory over decades, it's pretty wild. You can trace how those early educational limits morphed into a strict engineering mindset. And what's really beautiful about this cycle is how that same foundational structure supported a post-retirement return to learning, specifically integrating AI as a new system tool. The initial constraint evolved into a total life system alignment.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 6, the Kang-Yen Systems Model, structuring survival and success.
A huge takeaway of CYSM is that life evolves through refinement, not just hoarding experiences. As we step through this process, going from raw experience to refinement to validation to convergence and finally to structure, we see how chaotic life events are methodically purified. You don't just randomly gather experiences, you filter them down until only the most solid, validated truths remain. Think of it kind of like a filtering process. When those early, messy signals are purified through trial and error, and the daily noise is finally dialed down, this undeniable, crystalline structure naturally starts to emerge over time. You don't have to force the structure, it reveals itself through the refinement.
Which brings us to the complete CYSM blueprint. And wow, it is a brilliant multi-layer architecture. Notice how it cascades so perfectly from a high-level vision of meaning and purpose at the very top, down through objective functions that optimize for efficiency and stability. It then filters through system layers like habits and tools before finally locking into the core principles of daily execution. It completely bridges the philosophical right brain and the structural left brain.
Before we wrap things up, let's quickly distill the big takeaways here. First, your early direction is heavily shaped by environmental signals, not just your grand plans. Second, and I think this is the most important one, constraints are not limitations, they are system guidance. We saw how bilingual synergy created a powerful dual-track system, how structure emerges naturally through refinement, and finally, how time acts as the ultimate amplifier for those early constraints.
So, as we close out this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. When you look back at your own history and the architecture of your mind, what early limitation or forced constraint in your life is actually the strongest signal secretly guiding your future? It's something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep your eyes open for those signals.